thanks for coming today. I just wanted to touch bases with you for just a little while and talk to you about some of our innovations at TCI and hopefully let you guys become more familiar with some of our products and some of the technology in general that's going on in automatic transmissions nowadays. I'm going to move this computer over just a bit. I'll try to stay on camera here. Tell you a little bit to start with about some of our new torque converter technology. Now, you guys are probably already familiar with high stall torque converters and lockup and non-lockup torque converters. Pretty straightforward there, but basically the lockup torque converter was released in the early 80s, late 70s as a way to improve fuel economy, and it did that nicely. And over the last 30 years, that technology has become much better. Well, we brought it to a new level here. In the last few years, there's been a trend where, the guys want not only to use this for the better fuel economy, which is great, but better performance. Us being the hot rod guys that we are, we're always thinking, where can I get just a little edge, a little performance advantage over the competitors? And this is a nice way to do it with a lockup type torque converter, one that you could lock up at wide open throttle and eliminate all torque converter slippage. And some of the OEs are using this now. This technology has been out for a few years, but you got to be careful because once you exceed the power level of that converter, well, you start tearing parts up. You'll rip the clutch linings off, and bad things happen then. So that's why we developed our converter with the hot rodder in mind, something that's got enough clutch apply area that you can lock it up even with 1,000 foot-pounds of torque in your late model Camaro or Chevy truck or Cadillac, any 6L80, 6L90 application. And we recently added the 4L60, 4L70 transmissions as well. A few things I wanted to touch bases with on this one is this thing's got, it doesn't have the stock bearings in it anymore, and that doesn't sound like a big deal, but I've reviewed a lot of high-performance aftermarket converters over the last 20 years, and there's always a couple of glaring errors that I've noticed in most competitors' converters. Most of them just overlook a couple of the basic things, and number one is the bearing, especially the top side bearing between the stator and the impeller. It's got the most thrust loading on that bearing of any bearing in the torque converter. So it's important that you put a high performance converter together with the right bearing load in mind, and that's something that all of these have integrated into those. We've also got the turbine blades, not only furnace brazed, but hand welded as well. Are you guys familiar with furnace brazing at all? Furnace brazing is a technology that has been out actually in the World War II aircraft. There was a lot of furnace brazed parts. Basically, the technology just allows for a bronze silica paste to be applied to all the turbine blades, and then the thing is brought up to temperature to where the parts are glowing red, and it fuses everything together. It's a welding process is what it is. So that's one step. The next step is we hand weld these things in addition to the furnace brazing. So it really beefs up the parts, makes them really strong, and they don't break consequently. I remember some years ago when we started playing with these particular converters. I call it playing because to me that was my job at the time. We had a dyno that we could just almost break whatever we wanted to break. 706-inch big block Chevy, and this was a new core at the time. It was in a lot of S10 trucks and some late model General Motors front wheel drive cars. And we were hearing a lot of buzz about how efficient it is and commonly available. I said, well, let's try this. Well, I broke the first one. I broke the second one. I broke several. And then, we figured out hey, this is not adequate here. We need to beef up this turbine. We need to do the furnace brazing and the hand brazing, both of those in conjunction with one another. We need to install the high-performance bearings and so forth. Once we were done, I couldn't break it anymore. So it was pretty important to us from right off the bat to qualify the converter core that we used as a high-performance core and make sure that it could handle the power and that our customers would put to it. The 6L80, those converters are available in two different forms, and I'll just briefly explain the difference between the two, the street and the race. The street, our goal there was to design a torque converter that you could put in your late model Camaro or Chevy truck and just bolt it in with no mods at all. Just bolt the converter in and have some performance advantage. Well, there's a couple of problems with the late model vehicles. If you just bolt it in without any kind of retuning, reprogramming, especially with the L99 Camaro engines and the 5.3 truck engines, some of the displacement on demand technology that they've created nowadays makes for some crazy NVH. The vibration, noise, vibration, harshness that goes along with it. Whenever it's in four-cylinder mode, the engine's misfiring on four cylinders or not firing at all on four cylinders. So it makes for something that's not very fun to drive. So that meant to us we needed to include a damper assembly in the street converters that would soak up some of that vibration, if you will. So all of our street converters have that damper assembly integrated into them so you don't feel that vibration. Another thing that we did, and it's a patent pending technology, is we've integrated a valve. The factory design allows for partial application of the clutch in certain situations. So in other words, they want it to slip just a bit in certain situations, and they allow for a certain percentage of slippage. Well, if you put a clutch like ours has a lot greater surface area than the factory clutch had. And if you put a clutch that's got that much more surface area, it's going to try to grab, given the same apply pressure. So we had to come up with a way to allow it to slip that certain amount that the computer is requesting. So we've got a valve in there that actually will allow some amount of slippage at part throttle if the computer commands it. But the great thing is, if it commands wide open throttle, full lockup, then all that goes away. It bypasses the valve. Pretty neat technology, and we're the only ones that I've seen out there with such a thing. That's why we've got a patent pending on that one. Pretty cool stuff. It is. The question was, is that a hydraulic-only application of that valve? And it is. And basically the way that works is on the back side of those clutches, there's fluid pressure, maybe around 100 psi charge pressure. On the front side, there's 100 psi charge pressure. Well, when the computer commands the lockup to occur, it evacuates the fluid from the back side of the clutches. So you still got all the pressure on the front side, and so it just applies those. And now we've got pulse width modulated technology that allows those clutches to gradually apply. So there's some slippage, at least for a certain duration of time. So that was why we decided to incorporate that valve. So pretty sophisticated technology. There was a lot of thought that went into that particular converter, the street converter. Now that being said, I wouldn't want to say the race converter couldn't be driven on the street, because that's actually more popular. Street converter is what we call our race converter. It just eliminates that damper assembly. That's all it does. Everything else is the same. So still got the little valve in there, and it's still got the triple clutch pack in there. All the other parts and pieces are still there. It's just that it doesn't have the damper assembly. And this does two or three things. Number one, it lightens the converter up a bit. Number two, it makes it even stronger. But number three, it does require that you turn off the DOD, the displacement on demand. Okay, so if you're willing to do that, then there's no problems with running the race converter on the street. So that's actually our more popular setup. And if it were my car, that's what I would have in it, just because, hey, I want to go as fast as possible. A little lighter converter could only help, one thing before we go to the next page, a customer asked me last week, he said, I see that you've got 3 different stall speeds available in your 6L80 converter line. Well, we've got 3 listed, but we can just about build whatever you want. Some years ago, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago now, we purchased a 2010 Camaro when they were first available, and that was our goal, to build a converter for it, to go in there and replace the factory converter, have good drivability, and have no problems dealing with the factory computer programming. Well, we did that. Well, after that, we started playing around with the higher performance stuff. And at the end, we played around with so many different stall speeds. We found, the 3 more common stall speeds required. Fortunately, our parent company, Competition Cams, has a whole selection of camshafts that, we could say, hey, this cam package would go along good with this converter and this stall speed. So we worked out several of them there, but we can custom build whatever. We were playing around with a 3500 stall, custom built converter one day at the track, and our ET was improved by 0.8 of a second through the 8th mile with just a converter change. Now, we had taken the car and we had removed the displacement on demand and put some drag radials on it. But other than that, it was all stock. So 0.8 of a second improvement, that's nitrous territory with just a torque converter. Just want to give you a little glimpse of the inside. We had this cutaway at SEMA, and pretty intriguing what all goes on inside that converter. All of our clutches that we use for the lockup stuff now, they're all the woven carbon fiber type clutch material, so it's a high strength clutch, and it does allow some amount of slippage if the computer decides, hey, I need you to slip for this many seconds. Whereas some of the other more aggressive materials like Kevlar, they don't like to slip. So it's important to us to have something that, again, can go in these factory cars and work as intended. This converter, which I haven't even touched bases on, is a bolt-together design, which that's a big deal for the end user, for a hot rodder. If you wipe out your transmission and you bring this thing to a transmission shop, they can actually disassemble your torque converter there, clean it out, bolt it back together, and put it right in. You don't even have to send it in. Or if it gets some debris in there and damages a bearing or something of that nature, well, we can send you a bearing, and you still don't have to send the converter in. So it's pretty user-friendly from that standpoint, and industry first as far as a street converter. Our engineers spent a lot of time on CAD and using finite element analysis to pinpoint all the stress points and design the cover and the bolt together design, and have done a great job of it. We've got quite a few of these out there now, and these things are just beasts, very durable. The cover is a dialed fit, which means that it indexes only one way. You take it off and you put it back on in the same orientation so that everything's aligned perfectly. That's very important because, some of the factory stuff, it's all welded from the factory, except for on some odd applications, industrial applications. But the welded type converters, I've seen some that varied as much as, from 15 to 18 thousandths run out as measured from pilot to hub, which is way too much. And that wipes out your front pump seal and bushing, and bad things happen whenever that occurs. So this thing is within 5 thousandths of an inch TIR, and when you unbolt it and bolt it back together, then you get that 5 thousandths right back, which is important. Here's another shot of the interior. You can see the splines. The top set of splines is the stator assembly, and that goes on the large diameter stator tube sticking out of the front of the transmission. And then the lower set of splines you see is actually connecting the turbine spline to the lockup clutch assembly. It's a 50 spline clutch hub. It is. Yep. No other mods are needed. You don't have to put any kind of spacers or nothing like that. Just bolt it in. I've installed several here lately, just friends' hot rods and whatnot. A little Pontiac G8 a couple of weeks ago that I did for a friend, and just bolts right in. We even supply the mounting hardware for you, so you don't, if you booger up one of the factory torque converter bolts, we got you some spares here. Some of the other performance advantages would be, like we talked earlier, we can do just pretty much any high stall speed variation, different turbines, different stators, different impellers. We can put together a combination for most any hot rod. Very low moment of inertia. So what that means is we put everything in as close as we can to the center line where it makes sense to do so. So this gives you a lot more crisp acceleration, and the engine revs quicker, noticeably quicker, as opposed to a factory 300 millimeter converter. Lockups at wide open throttle, we've already talked about. HDT coating. This is a coating that we came out with several years ago, heat dissipating technology, and basically it's got a lot of metallic in the coating itself, so it just pulls it. It allows it to dissipate heat a lot quicker than most paints would. And then, like I mentioned a minute ago, our 2010 Camaro was able to drop 0.8 of a second with just the addition of the torque converter. Pretty impressive, and that was the 8th mile again. So, somebody stopped me last week and said, "Hey, I saw that deal where you guys said it dropped at 0.8 through the 8th mile." He said, "Didn't you mean quarter?" No, it was 8th. It was at Holly Springs drag strip. I saw it. It was pretty impressive to see that much ET performance advantage with just one part. We've got all these same parts available, the same technology available for the 4L60E, 4L70E, and same design, except those transmissions were not originally equipped behind engines with DOD, so we don't even offer the damper assembly in those particular applications. We just do what we call our race version, and those work quite well behind the 4L60s and 70s. Has anybody here installed one of our easy TCU transmission controllers or any aftermarket TCU? Pretty neat technology. What it allows you to do is take a late model electronically controlled transmission and install it in an early model hot rod. So if you've got an old Chevelle or Camaro or Chevy truck or whatever, and you want to install a late model GM transmission into that out of a 2005 or 6 Chevy Silverado, it'll go right in. A popular swap nowadays is a 5.3 liter or 6.0 liter into an older hot rod, and because the LS stuff has really taken off the last few years, and this allows you to control the transmission side of things. No laptops are required for the transmission controller. It just plugs into the main harness connector on the side of the case and the vehicle speed sensor at the back of the transmission. So pretty straightforward installation. It'll work with the 4L60Es, 65Es, 80Es, and 85Es, as well as the TCI 6-speed, the 6X. Like I said, easy install, easy setup. You can take full control of the shift firmness. So if you decide, let's say, hey, I want my wife to drive it today and I want to tone down the shifts for her, you can actually install a toggle switch and have what we call the economy mode, okay? The economy mode pulls a little line pressure out and allows for a little smoother shift. The performance mode, you could flip the switch, ground one wire, and now you've got 10% higher line pressure and allows the transmission to shift much firmer and be able to chirp the tires if you want to at that point. So you can program it to do that all the time if you so desire, or just use the switch to have a his and hers mode, if you will. Or maybe she wants the firmer shift. That could be the case. You can change shift points just at the touch of a button, both part throttle and wide open throttle. You can easily go in and change those shift points. If you program the thing to shift at 5,800 at wide open throttle, well, that's where it'll shift, 5,800 RPM. So it's really helpful. In the old days with the old turbo 350s and 400s, you had to go in and you had to play around with the governor springs and weights. Anybody ever done such a thing? I've laid on my back plenty of times, pulling the governor out, fine-tuning, just taking a little weight out, drilling. Yes. Oh, yeah. What a pain that was. With this, you don't even have to get your hands dirty. You can just go in, program it for a different shift point. If you want to make you a pass then, see how the car responds to it. Come back, tweak it again. It takes seconds to do it, and you don't have to get your hands dirty. Diagnostics are included with this, so if you hurt something, if you damage something, let's say the vehicle speed sensor stops working or it comes unplugged from the throttle position sensor, it'll tell you, hey, you forgot to plug something in here. It knows something's wrong, and it'll tell you. It's actually got a system error light that'll light up there on the handheld controller. This one, we have added CAN interface to this TCU in the last year. So it's included with all the kits, and there's an extra harness I can send you that you can plug into the main harness here, the CAN wires, so that if you've got a easy EFI fast system, or if you've got one of our XFI 2.0 fast systems, it'll CAN interface into that. At this point, it doesn't CAN interface into the factory ECU. This thing is also pre-wired for paddle shifters. So, a lot of the late model cars and trucks nowadays have integrated paddle shifters into it. So it's real easy with this one. If you've got an earlier hot rod, we've got a paddle shifter that we could sell you. Bolts behind most commonly available hot rod bolt patterns, 3-bolt, 5-bolt, 6-bolt, and 9-bolt now. So we've got a lot of different steering wheel configurations that it's compatible with. And it's a radio frequency interface. So there's a little box, a transmitter box, that goes under the dash and CAN interfaces with this guy, and sends and receives the signals to and from your paddle shifter. The paddle shifter also has a optional display board on the top, just a small 1.5 by 1.5 display board that'll show you the active gear, engine RPM, trans temperature, and all that sort of thing, which also can be seen in the little handheld programmer here. You can see all that information. If you're going down the road and say, hey, I want to check my transmission temperature, well, here it is in the little handheld. Pretty convenient and easy to use, and you don't have to put a lot of gauges in the car. We do have a billet aluminum case and a watertight connection. Everything's labeled. Like I said, it's a real easy deal as far as the installation there. Another common problem I hadn't brought up yet, but some of the earlier hot rodders want to keep their original look, their original gauges, and original speedometer. Well, whenever you go with electronic transmission, you lose that speedometer drive capability because you don't have that cable anymore. No place to attach it on the late model GM transmissions. So our solution was a speedometer control unit, which is basically a little black box that's got a little electric motor in it, gear-driven electric motor that's calibrated for whatever application. There's a series of dip switches that allow you to calibrate for most any pulse per mile that you have, because there's several different ones that could be used out there. But anyway, it's a plug and play into this. We've got its own connector into the harness. Plug it in, it drives a short cable and can spin the factory speedo. Pretty slick solution for something like that. Just want to show you some of the dashboards that you can go through with this setup. Once you do the installation, Then that's when the fine tuning starts. That's when you decide, hey, I need to increase my part throttle shift points, or I need to decrease my wide open throttle shift points, or what have you. You can go in and tweak those numbers as you desire. But I'll say this, I've installed a lot of these, and probably 90% of the installations were fine with the original numbers in it, the default settings. So there's always a few people that want to say, hey, I'd like for it to rev a little higher before it shifts at part throttle or whatever, and that's easy to do. Some of the information that it gives you, like we talked about a minute ago, you've got vehicle speed. You've actually got RPM. You can see the bar graph on the left-hand side. You've got vehicle RPM, actual gear, trans temp, throttle position, battery voltage. So there's a lot of different things that you see there. It's very helpful as far as troubleshooting. If you break a wire or you forget to plug something up, just having this dashboard available. Now, you can leave it at home. You can leave it in the glove box. It completely unplugs from the TCU. So it's not like it's required at all times, but it's there if you want to go back to it and troubleshoot or fine tune either way. And it makes it for a pretty nice little dashboard too. Again, one thing it does is eliminates the need for a lot of aftermarket gauges. I'll tell you a little bit about the initial setup. Some people were, when we first came out with this one, this is actually our third generation transmission controller. The first two required laptops to interface for the initial setup. The only problem there is when you get a guy that's not comfortable with using a laptop, and I know that seems odd nowadays, but we still get a lot of calls from the older systems. The guys they're not comfortable with technology, so they wanted something a little different. This reduced our phone calls by 50%, just not having the laptop interface, just because people could figure out how to plug this one in. There's only one place it could plug in, and it was clearly labeled. But the step one, as far as the actual setup on this, you just have to tell it what transmission you're controlling. Again, this thing will control just GM transmissions at this time, and any of those you see listed, the 60Es, 65Es, 70Es, 80Es, and 85Es, and the 6X. And it'll ask you how many cylinders you've got. Eight cylinders for most of us guys, but we do get some 4 cylinders and 6 cylinders from time to time, and some of the diesel guys that would prefer to have a solution like this. We do get some Cummins guys that want to install a 4L80E behind their early model Dodge Cummins, and this is a good solution for it. Typically, you'd pick up a tax source off an alternator on some of the early stuff like that, and it still needs that TPS that we talked about. The step 3 is that it asks you for the rear tire diameter. And if you don't know the tire diameter, it'll prompt you to say, hey, what's your tire size? If you can read on the sidewall of the tire where it says 275, 60, 15, it'll calculate it for you, and it'll get pretty close. If you're using the speedometer control unit, it'll need to know how many pulses per mile as far as the output. If you're using an electric speedo, most of the aftermarket ones are compatible with just most any output, but 4,000 pulses per mile, again, is a standard number, and all of the GM computers use it. So if you're using an aftermarket classic instruments or autometer electronic type speedo, 4,000 pulses per mile is typically a good number to start with. But you could consult that's adjustable, so you can consult the speedo manufacturer and they'll tell you exactly. Oh, it also requires you to enter the wide open throttle shift point. So it's the RPM that you want it to shift at wide open throttle. And then the last things that it asks you to do is to enter the rear gear ratio. 3.73, 342, what have you, and then to calibrate the throttle position sensor. And it just needs to know idle position and wide open throttle position, and it can interpolate between the two. So pretty easy, pretty simple. If you can just sweep the throttle body to those two positions, it automatically captures the min and max values. Turn off the power and it's good to go. Some of the more advanced options that can be found in it is, like we talked about it a minute ago, you can use a GPS to calibrate the speedo. Pretty straightforward and simple solution there. If you don't trust the tape measure or can't find one, you can adjust the shift firmness different than the factory shift firmness was. Adjust the shift points, both part throttle and wide open throttle. And we've got that performance mode that I told you about earlier, where you flip the toggle switch, ground the performance wire. Well, that firmness is also adjustable. So automatically it's going to bump up the line pressure by 10%. But if you want it to bump up by 15%, you can even do that. If you want to go in and change tire size, you don't have to go through the complete calibration. You can just go to the advanced options and do that, or change the TPS calibration if you're working on the throttle body or even the carburetor. If you have, you can go back and just adjust the TPS. But the whole setup only takes about 2 minutes, so it's not like it's a real time-consuming setup. Another thing is the TCC. After talking about the torque converter clutch a few minutes ago, you can fully adjust that mile per hour at which it locks up. And some people don't want the torque converter clutch to interfere with their around town driving, so they'll bump it up, especially if you've got a really large cam that doesn't like to be lugged to lower RPMs. Well, you can bump it up to 50, 55 miles an hour if you so desire, so that the torque converter clutch is not interfering with your around town driving. Okay, guys, well, I appreciate your attention today. Is there any questions about any of this stuff that we've covered, the torque converter or the easy TCU, either one? Well, guys, I appreciate your attention. Thanks for all the good questions. I appreciate your attention and not falling asleep.